Hey everyone, today we are going to talk about possibly my second most favorite topic, and that's going to be store openings. Little backstory about me: when I was younger, I wanted to go one of two ways with my career. I either wanted to be an interior designer or I wanted to be a baker. I am so lucky that owning Bake Shop has allowed me to do both. That being said, I've been able to save a lot of money by being able to do all of the design work myself. I realize that not everyone is able to do that, but I do think it has helped me to scale faster. I'm super excited and passionate about store openings, so let's go ahead and take a tour inside. I'm going to show you what I look for at this stage of construction. Contractors hate it, but that's okay. Alrighty, so at this point we are looking at electrical. That's what's being done at this point. This is a super important part because you want to make sure that they're putting outlets where you need them. Super important. And you need to think about things like speakers above, where you're going to put your Christmas tree, what switches you want to use to turn lights on and off. All those things, when you go through an architect, they probably don't know how exactly you want it because you're a restaurant, and if someone's not familiar with doing restaurants, it happens to me sometimes where I'll go in and one switch turns on every single light in the restaurant, and I have to go in and let them know that that's not how I want things. So it's super important that you do these site visits, especially during electrical. Over here you can see that they're wiring the sconces already. They have to know exactly the height of what you want to do, so you have to take into account where your bench ends, how high you want it to be compared to the ceiling, and all those sorts of things. So it's super important that you come in time to make sure that all these things are done correctly, because it's going to cost you more in the long run, and they call it like a change order, which is where they have to go back in and change something that they already did for you. So that's super important. So over here, this is also really important, which is where you're going to put all of your big pieces of equipment. I already came in here and drew in where I wanted to see the pastry case. It's also nice to do this sort of thing because on the plans you're looking at something, you know, not in three-dimensional. So once you start kind of marking things off with tape or drawing it or writing it in, you can kind of still make little adjustments without having to pay the contractors extra and do these sorts of change orders. So at this point, I usually always draw in where I'm gonna have all of my bigger pieces of equipment. All right, one other thing that I really like to look at too is the bathroom. Funny story. Well, all your bathrooms need to be ADA, which means like handicap accessible. But for some reason in the last build out that we did, our bathroom was probably 4 feet larger than what an ADA bathroom is supposed to be. And I so wish I would have caught it during the planning phase and made it a bit smaller so that I could have more dining room space. But I always do want to come into the bathroom once it's kind of already framed out and just see where everything's going to fit. I start imagining what I want the mirror to look like, what I want the light fixture to look like, all that kind of stuff, because I can have a plan in the beginning, but I may make changes once I see like how the lighting is in the space and like how everything kind of sits. So we are actually going to come in here and look at our grease trap. So this would be where I had to use the first part of our contingency fund, and that's going to be because the architect did not draw in the correct size grease trap in the plans. I should have caught that. I should know better at this point that I needed to submit an application to the city to figure out what size they want me to have, and my architect didn't do that. So I had to go back in and cut concrete after it had already been laid out. So that's going to cost me a little bit extra, but at the end of the day, you definitely want to have everything in place that the city wants you to have, because it doesn't even matter if you're completely done. They will make you cut concrete once you have flooring down if something's not right. So today I'm not really gonna make any notes to my GC or my general contractor because I've already been here a couple times and I already wrote in some notes for him. So there's not really any changes that need to be made, but this is definitely the step where you would want to talk to your GC and make sure that the outlets are where you want them to be, the lights are where you want them to be, and that can help you save a ton of money. Okay guys, let's get into what I know you really want to hear about, and that is, what does it actually take to open a bakery? We're going to go over costs, we're going to go over the process, everything you need to know to just kind of have an expectation when you do this yourself, or if you're just curious about what it takes. let's start first with budgeting and financing. That is my least favorite part and also my favorite part. I actually really enjoy the budgeting part myself. I like math and numbers and P&Ls and all that kind of fun stuff. That's what I do at Bake Shop as my responsibility, and I genuinely enjoy doing it. So doing it on like a build out scale and design and all that fun stuff, I really like to do that. The financing part, however, is not my favorite part. But we're going to talk about all of that. So in a timeline format, you're really going to want to acquire your financing first, but it goes hands in hand because when you're talking to banks, they're going to ask you for your budget, right? So you've got to have both in mind at the same time. For me, I have kind of two different models that I think about when I'm doing budgeting. I'll budget for, say, a production facility a lot higher than I would for, say, a retail location. So my next in location is my production facility. That one's going to be a lot higher of a budget to open. When I opened that location, I actually set my budget for $200,000 and I blew through that way faster than I thought I would. So I didn't do a good job budgeting that store. I ended up having to take one of those square loans at the end where they deduct money from your monthly sales to be able to give you financing. Or actually they deduct daily from your sales, a percentage of your sales. That took me about 2 years to pay off. I think I took out like $20,000. They give you like a flat rate. That's something that is available to you in an emergency, but it's definitely not something you want to do long term because it definitely ruined the revenue stream for that other location. But so $200,000 was not enough. And the reason being was that the reason I went over budget in a lot of ways was mainly the kitchen. The kitchen build out, anytime you have to build a hood system, which is essentially like the big fan that will suck out all of the grease, it's necessary during fire code. That is so expensive. You would not even imagine. I've gotten quotes for building out hood systems upwards of $100,000 one time in a large building with 8 stories, and they wanted to run the hood system all 8 stories. Anyway, I ended up figuring out a different solution at that particular location. But at my store in Nexton, I would say that I probably spent, I think the actual hood cost about $12,000, but then the installation cost me about $20,000. So in my mind, back in 2020, so 6 years ago, it was about $30,000 to install a hood system, but that was not what I had in mind, and that definitely made me go over budget. So I ended up spending $240,000 at the end, between some finances that I had to put in myself, that square loan, and then the funding that I got from the bank. And then I ended up having to do a renovation. I think I did it like 2 years after and kind of added the finishing details that got missed in the first time around. And I think I talked about that in my store tour if you watched that video. But all in all, that store back then would be about $300,000. If I was to build out another production store, I would definitely probably go on the higher end of like $350,000, just to make sure that I don't run out of money. But now I have spreadsheets since I've done this so many times, and my spreadsheets literally go line by line. Like I go through my lighting budget, I go through my construction budget. Now, you know, you can talk to a contractor during your financing process, I guess. So let's backtrack a little bit. So financing and budgeting and looking for a location are 3 things that you kind of have to do all at the same time, because your bank will not approve you for a loan if you don't have a location, right? You can't get a quote for your construction until you have a location, because depending on the square footage, you know, it could vary different types of things for a contractor. Like I told you, there was one location that I was at the ground level of an apartment building and I had to build a hood 8 stories up. So what I'm saying is all those 3 things have to happen simultaneously. So you gotta kind of expect to be a little bit like kind of thrown into all different directions when you're starting the planning phase. And that's totally normal. If you feel a little overwhelmed, totally normal. That's how I feel sometimes. Now I'm kind of used to it. I can kind of gauge costs a lot better. But when I was doing it the first time around, I was guessing. My very first store, I said, oh, I can open that with $80,000. I did, but I did it on the cheap. And I was in there doing tile myself in the bathroom. I routed the HVAC system with someone that wasn't even really licensed to do that. It was a whole thing, but I've lived and I've learned. Now, realistically, a store that doesn't have a kitchen, I think for me right now would probably cost anywhere between $180,000 to like $220,000, depending on how elaborate I want to get with tile or how much seating I want to have, if I have outdoor seating, if I have indoor seating, all that kind of stuff. So when you're going through your opening process, budgeting, finding a spot, and financing, do it all at once. Let's talk a little bit more in detail about financing. There are a lot of different options. You can go to one of these like overnight lenders online that are not traditional banks. Those tend to have really high interest rates. Your terms are usually a lot smaller, so you'll have to repay your loan in a matter of usually sometimes 5 years, which if you're doing the math at a 9% interest rate currently, with a $180,000 loan at 5 years, your payment is going to be high. This is all in the scenario that you're self-financed, which is what I am. Some people are lucky and they just have investors that just give them money and they don't have to worry about it. But you know what? I feel like when you're the one that's going through the trouble of getting the money and building the budget, I think you just learn a lot more, and I think you're able to do the kind of business that I'm doing where I'm growing exponentially and I want to have many stores. So I can say with all certainty that I've gone through the ringer, and I know it's because I've done it all myself rather than just having money handed to me. So anyway, when you are talking to banks, you can do the online part. You can do a traditional bank, which is really, really difficult, and that's what everybody starts with usually. I know I did. I know when I wanted to get my first store, I just walked into I think it was a Wells Fargo, and I said, hey, I need some money, and they were like, oh, you're funny. You don't really have any history of revenue or proven concept, and so I got denied immediately. Even though at that time I remember I had a food truck, so I did have some revenue, which I thought was like, oh, of course I have revenue. I've been in business for 2 years. Why wouldn't you give me a loan? No. So I actually ended up finding this incredible local lending organization. So they're called now the Climb Fund here in Charleston, and they actually fund people who don't get funded by traditional banks. One of the requirements when you first start their application is they want to see the turn down letter from a traditional bank. I feel really lucky that this place exists. I don't think that it exists that's available everywhere, but I feel really lucky because I created a great, I guess, camaraderie with the community there. A lot of other local businesses that I know of lend from them. They did a longer term for me, and they worked with my repayment needs. Like I kind of told them what I wanted to pay per month, and they kind of extended some of the, they do different loan styles, and they're able to kind of be flexible with people like me, who's a small business owner that needs the help, obviously. Now, the last loan that I'll talk to you about is going to be an SBA loan, which a lot of people say, oh, go ahead and do an SBA loan. I have not had a ton of luck with SBA loans. I've applied for them several times on different projects that I've tried to do. I've been denied several times. I'm actually in the process of closing on an SBA loan, but it has taken me 7 months. I started this process in June of 2025, and I'm filming this in January, and I still have not closed on this loan. The process is rigorous. So if you're ready to take that on, just be ready for a ton of paperwork and make sure you plan a very long timeline because that's just how it is. Anything that's government funded is going to require so much paper trail, so much. I mean, when I tell you that they asked me for, years of taxes, years of financials, they required me to get extra insurances, life insurance. They wanted collateral. They wanted all these different things to secure the loan. So in no way is it an insecure loan. It is a secured loan, meaning that I had to pledge an asset with the value of the loan at minimum. So I was very fortunate. I have some property that I was able to collateralize and get the loan approved. But the process of actually getting all the paperwork in that they needed has been brutal. Okay, so we talked about financing, budgeting, and finding a location. From there, you kind of just dive right into construction. That's going to be the second part of opening your bakery or your restaurant, whatever it is. And for me, this is actually the funnest part. I really, really love construction. Usually, realistically, if you're building out a kitchen and retail space, I would say your timeline is probably 4 to 5 months, depending on if your location is already built. I've gone into a lot of new locations where the building wasn't even built yet, and so that added several months to my timeline. But if the building is existing and you're building out a kitchen, I would expect anywhere from 5 to 6 months is a reasonable timeline. If you're just building out a retail location, I feel like the one that I'm working on right now, we really started construction in October, and I think we'll be open by early March. And I went through the holidays, so that sucks. Add a whole nother month to your timeline if you're going through Christmas and Thanksgiving. So October, November, December, January, February, March. I guess that's 6 months just for a retail location too. So at the end of the day, your construction phase, probably not going to be less than 6 months. A lot of that time goes into just a permitting phase. Permitting can take forever. And when forever, I mean 6 to 8 weeks, it can be in the office. So once you get your plans done with your architect, that's literally the first thing that happens. I usually start it while I'm still in lease negotiation before I even get money. I usually make sure that I have enough of my own money and my own capital to be able to start the plans because I know how long the permitting takes. So usually I kind of also do that right towards the end of the lease negotiation and finding the location. I'll already kind of start a conversation with my architect and get that in. I've heard of some architects taking 2 to 3 months. I have found one that can turn around plans for me in 2 to 3 weeks. So that's definitely something that's helpful. But in my very first location, I needed to use an architect and I didn't have any contacts. Those plans took me about 2 months to get. So realistically, you get your plans, that could take 2 months. You go through permitting, that could take 2 months. 2 to 3 months sometimes. And then once you actually start construction, then you're looking at another 6 months. It's a lot of time, right? I don't think I've ever opened a store from like inception of finding the location and being like, okay, like let's start talking to the landlord about signing this lease. I don't think I've ever built a store in less than a year. I mean, that's just how it goes. That whole process, people think it goes by so quick. It really doesn't. But I'm fine with it. I think it's really fun. Once you get past all the permitting and financing and all that kind of stuff, the construction part, super fun. I've worked with great contractors. I have a lot of contacts myself. So a lot of times when I find a GC, which is a general contractor, depending on who you find, if you have a big company or a smaller company, I usually work with smaller companies. They say, oh, if you know somebody who you like that does your, like your millwork, which is like the benches and like the woodwork and all kind of like the special details, then you can go ahead and use that person and then pay them directly. So that saves you some cost because anytime the contractor, the general contractor is doing something, he's going to charge you what the labor is and material and then add his 30% fee. Right? So if there's anything that you can subcontract yourself and talk to your contractor about and say, hey, I know this guy who can do this for me, or like, I don't know, if you know how to build benches yourself and say, hey, I want to build the benches myself, anything that doesn't have to do with your major things like plumbing, electrical, mechanical, HVAC, those things you just want to leave to your contractor because those require special permits and inspections. But little things like tile, flooring, painting, walls, all that kind of stuff, decor, if you know someone, just ask them. It can't hurt. And honestly, it saves you money. And I've done that a lot of times. So all that to say, in construction, there are ways that you can save money. There's a lot of ways for you to be involved. I definitely don't recommend for you to just hire someone and then not show up for 3 or 4 months and be like, hey, what's going on here? I do weekly check-ins with my contractors. Like, I'll go on site, and I've been filming some site visits for you guys, and I'll just be like, hey, like, what's going on? Let's talk, let's go through what's been going on this week. That helps to keep your project moving along. I've definitely seen some people that are not involved and they just come in every month and their projects get stalled. I've seen restaurants take 2 years to get built. People that I know in the same city that I'm in. So it can happen to you, but I guarantee you if you stay on top of your contractor and you do weekly visits, you're going to keep that timeline going. Okay, so you're done with construction and you say, oh my gosh, okay, we're ready to open. No. So once you're done with construction, you're going to go through your inspection process. This process shouldn't be that long, but I've definitely been in situations where things are wrong and you have to go back and fix them. Hopefully that never happens to you, but anytime, especially when you have a hood system for cooking equipment, that I don't think I've ever passed a hood inspection on the first try. I always get dinged by the fire marshal for something silly like this lever is 2 inches off from where it needs to be. I mean, it is in detail, and I get it, it's fire safety. So just expect that inspections could possibly take an extra 2 to 3 weeks once you're already done with construction and ready to open. I always plan faster than I should, and my partner always says, no, we're not ready to open, and I'll say, hey, I'm going to make a poster and I'm going to post it on the wall and we're going to open in 2 weeks, and then I don't think I've actually ever opened on the correct time that I posted on a poster. So I'm saying this to document it, and so then when I go to open Shadow Moss and I show you guys this poster, I'm going to make sure that my partner approves on the opening day, and then we're both in agreement that we'll actually open on that day so that we don't have to apologize to the public like we always do. But anyway, that's always the fun part. You get through construction. The fun part is here. You get to open. You get to experience the long line of people waiting to come into your store, hopefully. That part's really fun. I think every single time I open, I always have nightmares, probably a couple weeks leading up to opening, where I show up and I open the doors and no one comes. And even on my very first opening in a terrible location in downtown Charleston, which I can always get into more of like choosing locations in another video, that's a whole nother topic. Even in that scenario, I still had people at the door. So if you choose to open your bakery or your restaurant or whatever your dream food business is, just know that you're not the only one that's ever thought that if you do, because I am still going on my 5th opening coming in March, and I know I'll probably still have that insecurity. But just know it never happens. Someone always shows up. For my last opening for Bake Shop in Mount Pleasant, I was actually shook. There was a line, I want to say 2 blocks, if you will. It's on a strip mall, so it covered like 2 rows of stores. When I pulled up with my delivery of donuts. So, and that line went strong until we sold out 3 hours later, and I definitely didn't make enough product. But for Shadow Moss, guys, if you're hearing me, I'm going to make so much product that I will be shocked if we sell out. So, follow me along for the rest of the journey of my Shadow Moss opening, and I will see you in the next clip.